All right, so one of the last module here that we want to take a look at is how do we, kind of answering the question, how do we promote health? And several factors affect our ability to cope with stress, including our feelings of personal control, our basic outlook on life, and our supportive connections. Most stress management programs include training in aerobic exercise, biofeedback, meditation, relaxation. Although some biofeedback can sometimes help people control tension headaches, simple relaxation exercises often offer the same level of benefits rather than something more complex like a biofeedback. So researchers are seeking basically to identify the intervening variables, in other words, those things which potentiate some of the work that we do that may link spirituality and health, although many of those are not of particular surprise to many of us in a variety of faith traditions, if you want to put it that way. So let's look first of all with just coping with stress and the key components that come to that. And this particular diagram is an example of some of the key component pieces of handling stress. And essentially we cope with stress by finding emotional, physical, or behavioral ways. So emotional, cognitive, and that was one of the things that I talked about in previous videos, is our cognition, how we frame something, and behavioral ways to cope with stress itself. So through, and really it comes down to two very different ways of looking at stress itself, two different ways. One is referred to as a problem-focused coping, so focusing on the problem itself, or we look at a solution-focused coping. And each one has a particular outcome to it. Through the problem-focused coping, we attempt to alleviate stress by changing the stressor or the way we interact with it. So let me move over here. So with problem focused coping, as the name suggests, we are looking primarily at one of two things: either changing the stressor or changing us, to put it simply, which comes down to changing the stressor or changing how we interact with the stressor, We tend to use problem-focused strategies when we think we can change the situation, or at least change ourselves enough to deal with the situation. On the other hand, we also have emotion-focused coping, and that comes at the problem from a little bit different point of view, because we use it when we believe we can't change the situation. So emotion-focused coping tends to come into play when we feel like we can't change the situation. In other words, it has a lot to do with our perception of our ability to control the situation itself. For example, we may attempt to gain emotional distance from a damaging, discontinued relationship, and that's an emotional coping. Instead of physically, we can't move away from them, but we can emotionally distance from it. And that's sort of what's being conveyed in this little experiment up here, is that we basically put rats in a different situation where they can't control. In these two instances, neither one of these can control the shock source. The executive rat has more ability to manage it. So when it hits this bar, it's able to keep the shock from occurring. On the other hand, this rat, being a subordinate rat, has no ability to impact it. When we see a greater susceptibility to ulcers, a lower immunity, that the one that has the loss of control, in other words, this one in particular, who has the loss of control, we have a huge stress response as measured by the stress hormones, and it contributes to stress problems. Now, one of the key concepts that comes in here is called locus of control. And what we find with people in terms of the level of stress they experience really has to do with, back to what I had talked about before, and that is the level of control that they actually perceive themselves having. You have two different loci, if you will, of control. One is an internal locus of control, which essentially believes that I am an agent of change in the world around me. I can do things that will change things. It will make things better. And this is a problem-focused person. They feel inherently that they have the ability to do that. On the other hand, external locus of control means that no matter what I do, there's nothing that I can do to change things. So when they see things change, it's a matter of luck to them. In this person's landscape, if things change, it's because of hard work. And you immediately see that this person is susceptible to the external circumstances. This person actually believes that they can do something to make it different. And that's a key concept when we're talking about stress management, is the level of locus of control that somebody feels like they actually have. We found that not only in apes, where the particular ape that is the top dog in the grouping versus the ones that are at the very bottom ended up having a greater level of stress hormones being poured out, the ones on the bottom, versus the ones that had more control over their environment itself. So locus of control is a key concept. Coping with stress has everything to do with whether or not we're going to be problem-focused or emotionally focused, and how we're going to manage our world in terms of framing it and understanding it.